for you guys to have access to it. Now, what we have, let's talk about our goals. So in our previous sessions for this webinar, we had a survey with teachers, and in terms of what their goals were with blended learning and technology in general in the classroom is really to get the students more engaged, be able to differentiate teaching, as well as, of course, get some of that workload and admin to make your lives a bit easier with technology. So I can definitely see that this would apply for this session as well. And the good thing is that most teachers have used some form of technology already, so it's not completely new what we're going to talk about, but we'll find some very interesting ideas for us to use and apply as we move on with our teaching practices. Now, in terms of research, we did some research before this session, and an interesting fact is that around 1 in 5 Australian school students, they don't find school engaging, which means that they are less likely to learn properly. And the issue is that it gets worse as the students become older. So it's definitely, something that we need to address early on as well. And we do believe that blended learning can help with student engagement to really get them more interested in the lessons. We all know that it's not easy to make that happen because, according to, this research for the OECD countries, Australian teachers, they have one of the longer hours in all of those countries. So we do know that you have very little time to spare, and it's hard to implement changes when you don't have a lot of time. Now, with the whole situation with having to teach from home and teaching remotely, a lot of teachers have learned, how to teach online and how to implement technology with very little time. So you had a lot of things that you implemented. And in our survey, a lot of teachers want to continue to implement that into the classroom, even if they're not teaching online. It's a really good thing to see. Now, let's talk about what blended learning is, but not just in general. We're going to talk about what blended learning is to you. So for this activity, we're going to collaborate, and it's actually a very good example of what you could do with your students when you have a situation like this, where you have, been using technology, or you have a meeting with your students online. I'm putting a link on the chat there, and I want you guys to click on it. Once you open that link, you will see a Google Slides with your names in some of those speech bubbles there. And this is a very good example of exactly what you could do with your students. So by putting these cards with their names on, in this case, your names, you're limiting where kids could write, which makes it easier to manage everyone working on the same document. So the idea here is for us to use this document to talk about what we think about blended learning and how you would define it, or what comes to mind when you're thinking about blended learning. So just share your thoughts in your own card, and then I'll get Katie to read some of your responses there. And to be able to write on your card, just double click and you should be able to activate the text. And you guys can see Krish is already writing something there.
And so in this case, we can see Nusa set this up using Google Slides. You might have students writing on a discussion board, whether it be Google Classroom or Microsoft Teams. Something that is nice about Google Slides is that had we not put your names in here, you'll notice that you're seeing peer responses as anonymous. So in the event that you do want to give students that kind of low threshold entry point, you can keep their names anonymous. But some ideas we're seeing about blended learning include recording Zoom lectures, using the whiteboard, tools for revision and learning. Let's see, it looks like some of us are still typing. Can be good for quizzes, an opportunity for students to show their understanding.
And activities like this, the students, they really like to engage, especially when they're using something online or just something that's different than the pen and paper that they're so used to seeing. And when you give them the opportunity to express themselves, it could be a question about how they're feeling about fractions, for example, and they can talk about whether, you know, this is something, oh, I don't like it, or, oh, that's okay. And just from those conversations, you can already identify students that might struggle with the topic or that might not feel as comfortable with it or confident with the topic. It's a nice way to get them started talking about something they're going to learn.
Let's see, we're seeing Tace mention that they've used a combination of digital and concrete learning options, particularly in maths, which was excellent when you changed to online learning. Yes, I know talking about blended learning after this school year brings a whole different lens than the discussion might have been a year ago. So yes, I'm glad that that potentially helped the transition for your school. And now for students navigating this new normal, hopefully we're taking some of that with us. Let's see, uploading files and links. Darian's sharing some specific examples with Microsoft Teams and Microsoft Forms for quizzes, absolutely, and for attendance, some of those admin bits that, that we can move online. Let's see. Looks like some of us are still adding that idea that students can work at different levels and self-correct. A task like this, students can learn from one another, right? Absolutely.
Now, in an activity like this, we've had issues before where people wouldn't be able to connect, or for some reason they couldn't type and they couldn't access, you know, the thing that you prepared for them to work on. So it can be difficult at times. And in a case like this, you could just use the chat and say, if you cannot share your thoughts on the document, just use the chat to talk about what we are discussing at the moment. So it's always important to have that backup plan for everything that you're going to use in terms of technology. Sometimes it can play with you.
All right. It looks like everyone's shared their ideas. Shall we go back to the
original slides? Yes.
Yeah.
In order for you to see our slides again, you have to go back to Zoom. This way you'll be able to see us again. So this, you know, in talking about blended learning, we talked a lot about using technology and using tools, online tools. And this definition from the Victorian Education Department says that blended learning is an approach to education that combines online materials and other opportunities in a, you know, regular class method. So it is a blend of both online and offline activities, so not just, you know, technology. It's easy to think that whenever you're going to implement technology, blended learning, it has to be just about tech, but it's not. It is a combination of both. And the way we like to define this is really thinking about these three sections here, where you have the online intersecting with technology, with the offline, and the creativity. And this creativity part here is not just about us being creative with what we create, but also about allowing students to be creative in how they present their answers, in how they participate in the assignments. We're going to have some very good examples in very soon, but just allowing that creative mind to go free, it can make things easier and more engaging for the students. in terms of, let's look at some of the good sides of blended learning and you know, the advantages. When you have active learning, the students, they can use all their senses. You know, they're going to think, they're going to read, but they're also going to do things with their own hands. So it's very active, and you're combining the both of best words, you know, the offline, the things that you already know that work, but also new things so that you can differentiate and make sure that you tackle all kinds of learning styles. It makes it easier to tailor, you know, your teaching for your students when you're not just doing one way of teaching. Now, I think that the things that really worry us the most are the, you know, the challenges that come with blended learning and doing things differently. So another opportunity for us to collaborate together, let's use the chat this time, or you can just unmute yourself and talk to us. Let's talk about challenges that might show up as we try to implement blended learning in our classrooms. One challenge is definitely access to the internet. Sometimes it can just not work. Then everything you have planned doesn't work anymore. I see some people are typing. Definitely one other challenge is, you know, lack of time for planning everything. Natalie's sharing something on the chat. Do you want to read that for us, Katie?
Yeah, we've had a few people share technology glitches, failing, issues with privacy can come up, especially when we talk about different age levels, when tech is appropriate, how, let's see, students often sabotage process. For example, forgot my password. There can be some setbacks, whether it's admin, organization, behavior flare-ups, definitely, Andrew. Let's see, Gary shared encouraging less confident students to engage. Yeah, that can be a challenge depending on the type of activity or the context of tech involvement or collaborative processes. Let's see, Tace is sharing that when targeting gifted and talented students, yeah, meeting the needs of different students based on their strengths and goal areas can be difficult. Differentiating using engaging tasks that address all learning needs can sometimes be difficult. Yeah, and that really, thanks for bringing that up, Tace. That's something that we want to talk about, how technology can be leveraged to help us with that differentiating. So often in teacher PD or workshops, when I'm talking to teachers, differentiation seems like one more thing on the to-do list, right? Like, have I checked that box? Did I differentiate? Did I reinvent the wheel for every student? And so in the examples that we go through, we're really going to highlight how technology can be leveraged to do that for us, more or less, those intentional places that tech might support with differentiation. And then Chris shared some reluctance to learn in a new way. Absolutely, and I would say as teachers, we can be guilty of that. And then our students that might have come to us from different learning environments might have different reluctancies as well. All right, thanks for sharing, everyone. And then that last one here in instructional design, I know for me personally, when I was in the classroom, monitoring student progress against curricula standards while there was a lot of asynchronous work going on different platforms with different ways of showing understanding can feel like a lot to manage. So we'll look at that together as well.
Now, you know, talking about the challenges, one of the most common things that we hear from teachers is that, you know, oh, I don't have enough technology, or I don't have enough computers. It's not a one-to-one environment. How do I do that with my students? How do I use technology in the classroom when I don't have enough tech? So the next example that we're going to talk about is a solution to that particular challenge. So this is actually an example from a high school in California where they use station rotation. So what happens is the students, they will rotate through various stations to work online and offline, and then they can also work into groups. So the idea here is that you don't need to have all students working on the computer at the same time. And this allows you to also have different students working on different activities to suit the way that they learn the best. So some students might prefer to work online because they are shy to, raise their hand or to collaborate with other students. So they have that opportunity to shine as well. And then, of course, they will be more challenged when they have to work in the group activity. But having different ways for them to work through in a lesson allows all students to show understanding in the way that they do it best. So it's really nice to have that. And, because you don't have students having to work on the computer at the same time, it does make a bit easier in terms of having less tech available. This chart here is what a perfect classroom would look like if you had stations, a few groups of students, and they would very nicely go through, first the computer station, then the teacher station. We all know it doesn't look like that in the real classroom, and it can look messy. But I think Katie has a few very interesting ideas to talk to.
Yeah, well, actually, if you could go back to that last slide, Nusa.
Yeah.
When I saw this, and I know you've all seen, right, the idea of stations have been around for forever in classrooms. How we facilitate them or what they look like has changed. But this idea that students could move in these nice timetables in an organized fashion is something that in my own classroom, no matter how hard I tried, Tace, you mentioned you're a first-year teacher. I'm just going to spoil it and say I don't think it's possible. If any of you have done it, I would love to hear about it. But in my classroom, what this looked like was more of, here are some photos from my classroom. You can see there is a Chromebook underneath this student's, arms. And so technology was used. He was allowed to have access to a Chromebook during this part of the geometry. We called it a maths workshop, because it felt very jigsawed. And they were at a table that was a collaborative side of the classroom where talking and collaboration was allowed. You want to go to the other images? I'm not sure if we included any. Yeah, here were some others where, again, the technology was leveraged. The students were working on practice problems we were finding area of composite figures. This was a grade 6 classroom. And so you can see that some of the calculations are on this whiteboard table. Students were creative, and this was a quirky group that went with the cat theme. But then they were also taking pictures of their problem solving and uploading them online, which you could do if you're using another online tool, some type of portfolio where they can capture their work if it's not on tech. But then they were able to refer to notes and things that were in their maths notebook, things that were online that we had done as a class. You can see there's several students standing up against the whiteboard in this photo. So students were, given choice in where they worked around the room, but they all knew what they were responsible for. And then I was over at another table working with a small group of students. In my experience, it's not realistic to think that you're going to have that FaceTime with every student, every class period. But based on the gaps in understanding and, the intention that you have for working with and supporting certain students, this type of kind of multi-layered stations of sorts can be really helpful because you do have the collaborative nature of students supporting students, but then you also have time freed up as the teacher to have that one-on-one small group work.
Thank you, Katie. I always love seeing these pictures because I think they are such a true depiction of what it could look like. It doesn't have to be perfect like that chart. um, did anyone have a question? I think Darian, were you raising your hand or was, no? Okay, for a second I thought there was a question. That's okay. Now let's collaborate again. We have another activity for us to work on, and these activities that we are working together, they are going to be something that you take away with you. So I'm going to share this document with you, and what we're going to talk about is for those cases where you have a tech station, you can have multiple ways of getting students to work on a computer. So it doesn't have to just be a computer. It can be, different tools or different ideas. So in this document, I just pasted the link for you guys in the chat. You will see as well that I created a table to make it easier for everyone to know where to click and where to type. So that you can share your ideas and the tools that you're using for, or that you plan on using, or that you have heard, and also why you like them. Because
All right. Look at this, Nusa, I have to interrupt. We already have someone sharing Flipgrid on the tools and apps.
That's amazing. It's something we're going to talk about in a second.
Yeah, I was telling Nusa that anytime you have, this many teachers in a session, in a PD, and you're all from, many of you are from different schools, our hope is that this list can add to your toolbox of potential sites to check out. Not that you need more to do, but that you could have additional resources with an explanation next to them should you be in need of something like a video platform. Let's see. Some other examples we have being shared: Mathspace, all right. Literacy Pro, Spelling City, and it looks like TACE is explaining, that they help you keep track of the student data relatively easy. Thanks for sharing that. It looks like a few others are typing at the moment.
Some people are also sharing in the chat. Krish mentioned Mathspace and Desmos.
Great.
I used Desmos when I was in uni now, and I think I'll use it for a long time. It's a great tool, saves you time when you are explaining graphing with your students. Thinking about a few years ago when we didn't have these tools, having to graph them by hand, it is important that the students do know how to do that. But when you're just trying to talk about the relationships of graphs and how, slight changes can change the way the graph looks, it can save you so much time instead of having to graph, 5 or 6 different functions.
Right, and it looks like Gary shared GeoGebra, great to explain main features of nonlinear relationships. Absolutely. The GeoGebra applets, some of you who use Mathspace have seen the different applets that are embedded in our digital textbook. But what's wonderful is you can search within the GeoGebra website for specific maths concepts across year levels, right? Primary and secondary, which can be really, really wonderful. Let's see, Padlet was shared as well. Padlet is another favorite among students. I guess that novelty of being able to share ideas. For those of you that haven't used it, it appears kind of like a board and almost sticky note responses. And you can change the background. Let's see, Andrew's sharing an electronic whiteboard. I know some of you have used the whiteboard features on Zoom, or within Mathspace, students can use the markup tool to write their maths thinking.
Some really great tools that you guys are sharing there. With Padlet, I was going to try and use it for this meeting, and then I discovered that I think I have to pay for it. I didn't want to create an account. So I designed the slides to look like sticky notes in a way. So, there's always, a way to reuse something that you already have for free if you don't want to pay for, for a tool that you're not going to use every day, for example, if it's something for a once off thing. Okay, that's really good. Thank you for sharing your favorite tools with us. We're going to go back to Zoom now so we can see the slides again. And the next thing that I wanted to share is how Mathspace fits in with that limited tech scenario. So in terms of, you guys talked about GeoGebra, and let me just take this from this other side. So in our textbook lessons, I have here this particular lesson here from year 12, where you can see there are graphs and the students can use this to learn and revise the content, as well as to interact with the content that we have in the textbooks. I think this one lesson here has a GeoGebra applet where they can, let's compare what happens when you only have the tangent and you change, the values there, or let's add sine and cosine. So it can be quite powerful for the students to do this themselves and really interact with the content. It's so much easier. It's online and it's something that can be reused over and over. You don't have to recreate the resources. If it was on paper, you would have to recreate every time a student is using it. And in this case, it's easily available there. So you can always find these applets within our textbooks, as well as videos explaining examples. You can see word solutions for particular practice questions so that the students can really see the process of getting to that answer. And that can be so helpful for them to understand what they have to go through in order to solve a problem. For one, when I was learning, seeing the step-by-step was one of the most powerful ways for me to learn. And they can then also try the problem themselves to see if they understood, because whenever they click to try a problem, it generates a different example. So it's not the same one that they just saw. It's a new way to practice that problem. And that's showing...
Nusa,
yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. Just to clarify, these examples you were showing in the event that a classroom has limited tech. I think the idea that we were going to mention here is that even if you have one computer or iPad in a classroom, right, that these applets or any applets that you mentioned are really compelling. And so whether it's that you project it on the screen, that you record a video, and share it with students, or you have maybe one computer at each station. Say you have 5 groups of 5 students, and they have different jobs, and one person is, pulling the levers on the applet. Again, these are available for primary and secondary, so that interactive nature where students can watch what happens when they interact with the content is something that, with Wi-Fi connection and one piece of tech, can be a great tool in a low-tech classroom.
And we also have to remind ourselves when we think about technology that just having one computer for every student, it doesn't mean that it's actually helping them. It's how they're using and what they are using in that computer that really makes a difference. So sometimes having less is even more effective.
Definitely.
Let's see. So let's go back to this one. Another way that they can use Mathspace quite easily for an activity like could be a starting activity where they do an adaptive task themselves. When a student logs into their account, they can start a self-started adaptive task. So that could be the case where the students, they each have a turn to go in and try a self-started adaptive task, and that can be a way to measure how they started that topic at the beginning of that lesson. It gets recorded so that if they struggled with a particular question, you can revise it later, and the students have also access to their progress when they look back on the topic to see what they have mastered already. So they can easily click here to start a self-started adaptive task on the student side.
And that's something that I know some of you are primary educators as well, or you're using other tech platforms. It's becoming increasingly common to have a self-start type button where students can be quite self-directed in their learning. And so in an effort to build that agency and put the ownership back in the hands of our students, that's one way that tech can be leveraged to allow students to go down these individualized learning paths. So I'd encourage you, if you are using other platforms, just to take a look and see, is there that option for my students to jump into a task independently, because all of that data will still be reported for you as the teacher within Mathspace, definitely, and in most other learning platforms as well. So that's just something to consider when you're thinking about teacher admin and differentiation. It's one way for students to kind of carry some of that, that load as well.
And if you have some students that would be more advanced in that particular topic, it's a great way to get something that will be right for their level, because it will adapt to what they are able to solve. So you don't have to create a different task that is more challenging just because you have an advanced student in your class. You can use technology to do that for you. Let me just stop this one. Going back to our slides. And you guys mentioned that you use Desmos, and this would be another example of what you could have in the tech station for the students to explore. And this, of course, in the case of a high school student, would be quite valuable. You can have something that is more suitable for primary students as well, so that they can interact in that station.
And similarly, I just wanted to mention that a graph like this, or any image, you could be teaching grade 3 and have a maths image on the screen. If tech does fail, but you have the image that was generated via tech, having students discuss what they see, ask questions about what they see, generate their own story problem or maths context to match what they see. You can really do a lot with some of the more advanced images that we find online. So that's one idea, again, low tech, but still utilizing it in this blended learning environment.
Now, the next point that we wanted to address is another common issue with just classes in general. We always have students who are not engaged, and this was actually something that is close to my heart, because as a student back in years 5 and 6, I used to hate maths. And, even though today I can call myself a mathematician, I actually didn't like the subject at all. I thought it was boring. It didn't like what the teacher was saying. And this is a really good reminder for us that, sometimes the students are disengaged because they're not learning at the correct level, or because they're not learning with the right way that they like to learn. Some students like to see pictures, others, they prefer to write things down. So meeting them where they're at is really important. We have an example here of one of our colleagues who was teaching just last term, and now he joined Mathspace. So Alex had a collaboration with an online class. This is a completely online environment, as an example. And he had posted a question on OneNote, and the students were then talking with themselves and trying to find a solution and really discussing how to solve this problem. And all of these notes that you see, they're all from the students. So Alex didn't have to do anything in terms of give them the answer, because they were able to collaborate together to find the answer. And what this does is it gives the student the ability to also teach their peers. And one of the reasons why I decided to study maths was because my teacher made me a tutor for my peers. So I was teaching what I knew. And that was something that made me really excited about the subject, because it felt like, oh, I actually know, this thing, and I can teach somebody about it. So really giving the students that opportunity makes it more interesting and more engaging for them.
And Nusa, if I could just add on, because I'm seeing this and thinking of, when I taught grade 5, it might not look like this in a primary classroom, right? However, that idea of capturing something via tech and allowing the discussion and the building upon ideas and the question asking to take place can start, in prep. And so I think the powerful part of this collaborative example is just that when given the space, whether it be on a tech platform like this or offline, when we create that space and those norms for discussion and allow students to really grapple with a maths concept or another content area, they can truly fill in gaps in understanding and delve much deeper than maybe, our learning objective initially stated, or the standard might ask students to explore this topic. But when we allow them to have the conversation, sometimes the learning goes far beyond that, which can be wonderful for those students that are above or below grade level to be part of that type of dialogue. And so having those opportunities in a digital context and an offline context can be really, really meaningful.
I wanted to share one example as well from one of my teachers when I went to university, and because, when I struggled back in high school, I had to redo some of my classes in maths, and geometry was one of them. So she was talking about volume of pyramids, and instead of just talking about, the concept itself and then giving us the formula to find volume, she brought rice into the classroom. When I saw that, I was like, why is she bringing rice into the classroom? What are we doing here? And we were using rice and filling up the shapes and then comparing the volume and trying to guess, is it 1/4? Is it 1/3 of a regular, maybe, or what was it, the square cylinder. So not cylinder, sorry, the square cube there, the shape. And in looking at that, we together as a class, we defined what the formula for finding the volume, what it was. And it was so interactive that I didn't see any students not participating. And the reason was just because it wasn't a lesson. It was something that we were interacting together and trying to find things together. So she was giving us the opportunity to find the answer instead of the teacher just telling us what the answer was. And I think that was quite valuable. This is where we have our example that some of you guys are already using. And I think Katie has an example from one of her classes that, you allow the students to choose the way they want to present the answer.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that, in the same way that some students prefer to, be auditory learners or demonstrate their understanding orally and verbally. When I started allowing students to record their maths thinking, this was in the middle grades via Flipgrid, a free video platform. It looks a little silly with all of the stickers, and my students actually didn't use those at the time, but the depth that they would discuss a topic went far beyond what I was able to capture in a written exam or in an online multiple choice, exit ticket. And so in working with teachers more and more, I'm finding that is some capacity, somewhere online where students can talk about their thinking, no matter the year level, whether it's a primary student, a secondary student, an English language learner, a very gifted student, whoever it might be. That opportunity to talk about their thinking can help them, construct their understanding, we know metacognitively, but it can also offer some unexpected insights for you as their teacher, and they can be revisited. You can use it to show progress from beginning to end of term or year, or it can be a fun way for them to share what they're learning with their peers, quite versatile.
And it's a lot more engaging for the students. They will definitely want to be creative and show their video editing skills, which we can be surprised at how much they know.
Right. I guess that was my example I was supposed to show. We all have students who want to be famous YouTubers in 2020. I guess that's a new norm. And
Yeah.
so anyway, students would really take this seriously. And so it became one of their optional homework assignments. Rather than complete a certain maths task that I had, they could record an episode, and it was kind of like a "You're the Teacher," where they would end up sharing it with peers. And then I knew if they were watching the video, it was building a relationship, but then it was also filling in gaps for other students' understanding. So it served multiple purposes, but it looked really fun on the outside.
Now, it can be quite challenging when we have so many different ways to get the students engaged and working on a task, to really track progress and monitor how they're doing. You might have a student that presented a video as a response, another one that presented, just a regular answer on the paper. So how do you do that? It can be challenging. Things that really help is having something that can be real time in tracking the data for the students. There's an example from Mathspace is our live mode, where you can see what the students are doing at the time that they're doing things. So with the last 90 minutes, if you click there, you can see students logging in and doing the work. You can see which ones are active, which ones are working on particular tasks. And it's nice to have even short tasks that just capture some of the concepts that they have been working on, to have a data point of their understanding, so that later down the road, it's not something that would surprise you if they're struggling with a particular concept. In Mathspace, if they have, I think it's 3 questions in a row, if they make a mistake 3 in a row, they are flagged here for the teacher. So right away you can go in and see, clicking on this icon here, you can see what they're doing wrong in a question. So really an easy way to address a common misunderstanding that they might be facing. Another way that we like to track progress is creating those tasks. So looking at, I think I have it here, a task report here where you can see how they're performing. And if they are short, they become easier for the students to complete. So they will most likely complete the whole task, instead of, if you have a task, it's 20 questions, maybe you're not going to have all students completing it. But if you have 5 questions that are really the good questions that you want them to answer, and that can measure their understanding more deeply, then that's going to be more meaningful than 20 questions where they don't do all of it. And with Mathspace, you can track that progress more easily because it's all there in the task report.
Nusa, one thing I was going to add is that in the event that you do have students, that are on these personalized learning tracks, where you have students that are advanced, students that are reviewing previous year levels, content, etc., having check-ins like this that are electronic. In Mathspace, you can hand-pick the questions and assign to groups of students, or you can use the adaptive tasks like we mentioned. But that idea that you could throw, 3 to 5 questions at students with different naming systems and see the data really easily. I think from my own experience, when I tried to do that part offline, I would do exit tickets. I would have students use sticky notes to answer a question on their way out the door. I tried to simplify things to capture their knowledge while it was fresh, as opposed to waiting, for a long summative assessment, but more that continuous formative assessment to inform my teaching. But I think that's one area that technology can really be leveraged as a tool, in that the admin piece on the teacher side of things, to generate a quick 5-question quiz, exit ticket, warm up, it feels much more user-friendly than if I'm, typing up questions and printing and trying to make that the offline bit. when you think about differentiating the continuous assessment.
And I was also thinking about the fact that if it is a short check-in, the students are not going to be as anxious about it as if it was a big test at the end of a whole topic.
Right, absolutely.
I for one didn't like tests, so we can definitely assure you that when it was just a check-in, I would do so well. And my teacher in grade 5, he remembers, oh, it's a test. Okay, I forgot everything now. So, you know, if it is a short quiz that doesn't seem like a big issue, the students will definitely perform better, and you actually capture the true understanding of that concept for the students.
And last thing I'll add is that when students know, I mean, they're aware if they're using multiple online platforms and they're doing the collaborative maths or the paper homework, whatever it might be, if you present it to them in such a way where you're truly just trying to capture their understanding and it becomes part of your classroom norms and procedures, then that expectation that they will report to you in some way to show their learning becomes a really natural part of your classroom flow.
Exactly. And, you know, technology also makes it much easier for you to see what is the question that most of them are struggling with. Right away, you can see the ones that are doing well or the ones that might need some help with a particular question, where in a paper-based version, you would have to take note of every single question and do that manually. So yeah, in this case, thinking about how to use tech in a way that facilitates your life, I think it's really valid. Now, the next point that we wanted to address, and this is the last one for today's session, is how we can use blended learning for differentiation. And we have been talking a lot about differentiation since the beginning. You know, when you have students doing different things, that is a form of differentiating already. But in doing that, I think it would be really powerful for us to walk home with a bit more of ideas from you guys to share with each other on differentiating. So I have pasted another link on the chat for our other activity here on techniques and ideas and tools that you might use to differentiate your teaching. If you can share with us what are those techniques and when and how do you use them with your students so that you can differentiate teaching for them?
And there's no wrong answer here. Sometimes when I see technique, I think, oh, you know, what's the name of this technique that I'm using? But as Nusa mentioned, a lot of what you've been doing throughout this whole school year with digital platforms and in classroom learning is differentiating for your students. So if you want to share any specific ideas, you know, we mentioned the check-ins or the quiz online to help with admin and different question sets. If there's anything like that that comes to mind, feel free to share.
Or even if you have one particular student that you usually have to do something different, you know, just what you do for that student is going to be valuable for other teachers here to hear and read that. I see some of you already sharing. So Tace is mentioning that we tend to use diagnostic data to group students for each topic. So that struggling students are given more face-to-face time with the teacher, I'm assuming. Yeah, and that's such a powerful way to make sure that the students that need it the most are the ones that get the attention, so that you can tailor the way that you're presenting your content for those that are going to struggle with it, instead of for those that are going to do just fine with it. Darian shared, I'll let students take the lead and then get them to explain or demonstrate to the others, mentoring each other. That is really powerful. It's similar to some of the ideas that we talked about previously, and I think there is so much room for more of that in the classrooms. I had, you know, teachers mentioning to me in the past that they sometimes feel like, oh, I need to control my students and make sure that everyone is doing the right task, and that limits what they can learn. Because if they are told to sit down and be quiet, it can be something that then they're discouraged to talk about what they're learning and what they're thinking. So really let them collaborate with each other is really powerful. Can you see the document as well, Katie?
Yeah, I was just giving some wait time, think time.
Yeah.
But I noticed that Gary mentioned differentiated questioning and letting students contribute where they have the opportunity and the ability, the knowledge. Differentiated questioning is fun. I know some teachers, you know, will hand select what questions different students see. I've also heard of teachers who give a choice menu where students can choose, say, the number set in maths that they want to apply to a story problem or a context. And it can be kind of fun to watch, you know, those learners that we might perceive as struggling take on a challenge, or those students who are, you know, excelling or above grade level want to explore a different number set. Let's see, using readiness tests and reviewing what students have learned in the past. Absolutely tapping into that prior knowledge, being able to support struggling learners. Yeah, Krish mentioned that information that we often assume is prior knowledge. Students have likely forgotten some of that over time. Let's see, yes, letting students choose.
Natalie is also talking about having testing that allows us to see which we need to target, I guess, which concepts that we need to target. And that is so powerful. If you can get an understanding of exactly where the gaps are with your students, then you can truly differentiate. But I imagine how challenging that can be when you have one kind of test that you have to apply to all students, and, you know, 25 students in your classroom. A lot of the times these diagnostic tests, they can measure some of their understanding and some of their gaps, but not all of it, depending on how it's designed. So it's definitely a challenge, but having that measurement is better than not having anything at all.
And Nusa, I'm looking at the time. I do want to be mindful
Yes.
that it is 5 o'clock. So for anyone who needs to run, we understand you'll earn your NISA credit. Thank you, and I apologize that we're going to go a couple minutes over. For those of you that have a few minutes, we'll go ahead and share a couple quick examples for differentiation and then wrap up. Does that sound good,
Yep.
Nusa?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So if we can all go back to Zoom. Well, another example for differentiation is the flipped classroom. And this example here is a school from Sydney where the teacher recorded the lesson prior to the time that the students were in a classroom, and then she let them watch the lesson while she was helping those students that needed some help with the content. She used Zoom to record the lesson. Now, it can be quite daunting to think about recording a lesson yourself. You know, it is quite easy if you use Zoom, but you don't have to do it yourself because we do have resources online. So for example, we have this library with Eddie Wu's videos that you can access all of his lessons. And I'll show you quickly here. And you might be teaching a particular topic for a particular year level. And instead of having to go on YouTube and trying to find exactly the lesson that you need to share with your students, you can come here look at the year level, and then pick the topic that you need. And there are the videos that he has made. This matches really well with our textbook content. So even the name of the lesson is the same, so you can right away find what you're looking for. And this, you save time instead of having to create the resources yourself to share with your students. It's already there for you. The last thing I wanted to show in terms of using a resource that can be used both online and offline is the newest addition to our textbooks, which are the worksheets. And they can be accessed within the textbook on this tab here. We don't have it for all year levels yet, but we're working on releasing all year levels from year 7 all the way to 12, so that you can have this resource that you are going to be able to print them. So looking at this, it looks just like a regular textbook. Even the formatting is really nice. It reminds me of the regular textbook. And this is what some of them look like once you're able to print them. Having these resources that can be used both online and offline really changes the game in terms of, when you have trouble with technology. If you have a way to print that prior to your class, then it makes it much easier to have the resource available for all your students. Also addresses some issues with equity, because we all know not all students have access to technology and the internet. So it's really important to have that. And one of the reasons why we went ahead and created the worksheets for our textbooks. I see that some of you have to leave. That's okay. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I will send you all the resources that we have mentioned. I'll package everything very nicely in a document, so you have all the links, all the pictures, and also some of our the research that we've done with the articles, and where you can find all the data that we mentioned as well. So you can also have a read through. There's some very interesting articles there for us.
And also, before people jump off, just wanted to say thank you so much for supporting students throughout this year. I know it's been a whirlwind, and your students are so fortunate to have caring teachers like you who are continuing to learn so that you can provide quality instruction for them.
Yes, I'll second that. Thank you, Katie. For those of you that have some time, I pasted another link on the chat, so you can give us feedback on what you really liked about the session and what you wish we had done, so that we can always make it better for future runs that we have for this webinar. We're able to stay on the call for those of you that have any questions. So you can open your mics and ask questions, anything that we might be able to help. This is just a fun image for you guys, as long as it's running.
Blended learning. It might look messy. Yeah. And sometimes it feels like you're throwing a lot into the blender, but hopefully, right, there's some nutrients in there that'll stick for your students.
And you don't need to do it all at once. You can put one ingredient at a time. This way things run smoothly, more easily. So these are the works cited that you guys are going to have access to, and I'll open for question for those of you that want to chat with us still.
Thanks, Noosa. Thank you, Katie.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Noosa. Thank you, Katie. It was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gary.
Thanks, everyone.
Hi, Noosa. My name's Andrew, and I'm a TAFE teacher. If I want to use Mathspace, do I have to subscribe to it like Mathletics, or would TAFE subscribe to it? How does it work?
For now, what we have is you can have a trial of the platform to try with your students and see if it's the right fit for you. But once you decide that you want to use it moving forward, then it is a subscription program. So TAFE, your campus would have to subscribe to the platform, and it's per student per year, the price that we have. So it's you don't have to pay for a teacher subscription, for example. It's just the access for the students that would be using Mathspace.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think, Andrew, your name sounds familiar. I think you probably have received an email from me talking more about a rolling trial that we're offering for TAFE in term 3. So look out for an email from Nusa with more information, and then you can schedule a meeting with me if you have more questions.
It would be good to trial it with a few students.
I cannot hear you for some reason. It's really low.
I was just saying it would be really good to trial it with students. Can you hear me?
I think you're saying that it would be really good to trial with your students.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, perfect. I'll open access for you. You should be able to log in with your email, and I'll send you the login details just as a reminder so you can access the platform.
Sure. Thanks, Nusa.
Thank you, Andrew. Perfect. All right. If we don't have any other questions, then oh, actually, let me stop the recording so it can